My name is Marcel Alden, and on the morning of my first wedding anniversary, I let myself believe in softness again. I rolled over in bed and found Amira already awake, her dark eyes watching me with an unreadable expression. She smiled soft, serene, and leaned down to kiss my cheek. Her lips were cool, gentle. For a moment, I thought maybe the distance that had crept between us like a silent intruder had finally started to fade. Maybe the friction of the past few months was just the natural erosion of routine. Maybe love really could smooth over what time tried to corrode. "Happy anniversary," she whispered. I smiled, but my throat felt tight. "Happy anniversary." Then, as if summoned by fate, Ronan strolled into the room with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, grinning like a man who wasn't currently sharing intimate space with someone else's wife. My best friend, or so I still wanted to believe. He'd been my right hand in both war and business, a brother by choice. Today, he looked relaxed. Too relaxed. But I ignored the chill that ran down my spine. Maybe I was just being cynical. Maybe I was overthinking again. "Big day," he said, handing me a mug. "We've got something planned. Peaceful. Nostalgic." Amira glanced at him. "We're taking you to Celestine Falls." That caught me off guard. Celestine Falls. The same place we'd hiked just a week before our wedding. I remembered every stone on that trail, every laugh Amira had let fly into the wind. We'd kissed under the roar of the water, promising forever with our eyes. Going back there now felt, oddly timed, but poetic. "I thought you hated hiking," I joked, trying to mask my surprise. She shrugged, sipping her tea. "Some things are worth revisiting." We drove in silence, the 3 of us cramped into my old Defender, which rattled and groaned like it could sense something was off. The tension in the car wasn't loud, but it was present, like a low hum beneath a beautiful song. Ronan sat in the back seat, but I could feel his gaze in the rearview mirror. Amira stared out the window, her fingers resting on the door, her nails tapping in absent rhythm. Still, I told myself it was nerves, or the awkwardness that comes with planning a surprise. I had been distant, I admitted that. I'd buried myself in boardrooms and contracts, and maybe, just maybe, this was their way of pulling me back into something real. A reminder of where we started. I wanted to believe it. When we arrived, the air was crisp, kissed by the mist that always lingered around the falls. We hiked slowly, the gravel crunching beneath our feet, birds chirping overhead like the forest didn't know it was about to change my life. The higher we climbed, the more the wind picked up. Amira walked ahead, occasionally turning around with a smile that felt too practiced. Ronan stayed behind me, oddly quiet for a man who usually couldn't shut up. At the top, the view was just as I remembered, raw, endless, beautiful. Water thundered down the rocks like a beast with no leash, wild and unapologetic. I turned toward the edge, soaking it in. This was the kind of place that made you feel small, but in a humbling way. I closed my eyes, let the spray hit my face, and inhaled. That's when I heard it. Amira's voice. Triumphant. Cold. Not whispered, not accidental. Clear. Deliberate. "Finally, we'll cash your life insurance and take over your company." My heart seized. I turned confused, frozen, just in time to see the look on Ronan's face. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Victory. Then the world tilted. Their hands were sudden on my back, for palms, solid force, and my body was no longer mine. Gravity did the rest. The sky became a blur of grays and greens, the roar of the waterfall consumed every sound, and for a terrifying second, I saw Amira's face, framed by the jagged edge of the cliff. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. The fall wasn't fast. Not in my mind. It stretched, warped, became infinite. My arms flailed instinctively, my lungs seized, and then I hit the water. Not like a stone, like a memory being erased. Coldness bit into me. Darkness swallowed me whole. But even as I sank into the chaos, something inside me clicked back into place. Survival. Not desperation. Not panic. Just the pure, undeniable refusal to die. Not like this. Not for them. Not yet. They thought I couldn't swim. That was their first mistake. They assumed that because I'd avoided beach vacations or open water adventures, I was afraid of it. They never knew about the summer I'd spent in Nice during my university years, how I'd taken diving lessons every weekend to distract myself after my father's funeral. They didn't know about the certificates I never bothered to frame or the midnight swims I took when I couldn't sleep. So when my body slammed into the icy basin beneath Celestine Falls, instinct took over. I was already bleeding, dizzy from the impact, but as the water closed over me, I remembered exactly what to do. Kick. Roll. Breathe. The current was wild, twisting through jagged rocks and pulling me into its throat like it had every intention of grinding me into pieces. I let it. Fighting it would have been suicide. So I surrendered, not in spirit, but in motion, allowing the force to carry me deeper into the gorge, away from the false sight, away from their line of sight. My lungs screamed, my muscles ached, and still I stayed under. Long enough to make sure no one was watching. Long enough to die convincingly. When I finally surfaced, it was half a mile downstream, in a calmer pocket of the river where trees leaned in to whisper secrets and the world seemed hushed. I grabbed onto a thick root jutting from the bank and dragged myself out, coughing up river water, blood, and betrayal in equal measure. My ribs throbbed with every breath, one shoulder was definitely dislocated, and my right leg had gone numb from a gash I didn't dare inspect too closely. But I was alive. Alive. And that changed everything. I crawled a few meters into the tree line, collapsed onto a patch of moss and dirt, and stared up at the canopy above me. The sun filtered through the leaves in golden shards. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance. It was quiet, surreal. Like the earth hadn't just tried to kill me, or like it had tried and failed. My mind began to slow just enough for the weight of it all to hit. They planned this. Amira, Ronan. They had looked me in the eyes, smiled, laughed, kissed me, and all the while, they had been plotting my death. My wife. My brother in arms. The people I would have bled for, and in many ways, already had. I thought back to every late-night boardroom meeting where Ronan insisted we move certain funds. Every time Amira had dismissed my questions about our accounts or brushed off the tension between her and my business partner as just friendly teasing. All of it had been camouflage. A performance. A long con. And I had played my part like the perfect, unsuspecting fool. I should have been dead. The fall should have broken my neck. The current should have drowned me, and even if I had survived that, the wilderness should have swallowed me whole. But here I was. Bloodied. Battered. Breathing. They thought they had succeeded. They would be driving back by now. Maybe even holding hands. Maybe planning how to spin the story, how to sob at the police station, how to call my lawyer and claim grief, how to smile through the press conferences once my body was found. But they wouldn't find it. Because I wasn't a corpse in the river. I was a man reborn in it. It took every ounce of strength to stand. My body screamed in protest, but I forced myself upright. I needed to get out of the area, away from the falls, away from anyone who might recognize me, away from the life I had just been murdered in. There was no going back. Not yet. No confrontation. No vengeance. Not until I understood every piece of this betrayal. Not until I knew who else might be involved, what they had already claimed, and how far they had gone. I needed time. I needed silence. I needed to vanish. I limped through the forest, using a thick branch as a makeshift cane. Every step was fire, but the rage inside me kept me moving. I didn't feel the cold. I didn't care about the blood caking my clothes. All I could hear was her voice in my head, sharp and echoing. Finally, we'll cash your life insurance and take over your company. That wasn't panic. That was certainty. They were confident, which meant they had done their homework. They knew the numbers, the clauses, the blind spots. They thought they had the perfect plan. They just hadn't planned on my will to survive. Eventually, I reached the edge of the trees and spotted a winding gravel road. Remote. Quiet. The kind of place rarely traveled, which made it perfect. I collapsed by the roadside, adrenaline fading fast, and for the first time since the fall, I allowed myself to feel the pain. Sharp, merciless, total. But even then, through clenched teeth and a blood-slicked face, I whispered the words that would define every moment going forward. They tried to kill me. And now? Now I would return the favor. Not with murder. With ruin. I don't know how long I lay there, half-conscious and hidden among the tall grass beside that gravel road, before I heard the low rumble of an approaching engine. My vision swam. Blood crusted the side of my face, and every limb ached with the weight of what had happened and what would come next. I should have been dead. That was the plan. Marcel Alden, the faithful husband, the empire builder, gone in a tragic hiking accident. Drowned. Lost to nature. A body too difficult to recover from the rocks below Celestine Falls. Amira and Ronan would have cried crocodile tears at a press conference and cashed in their gains before the water dried on the stones. But I was still breathing. And the ache in my bones wasn't just from injury. It was the kind of ache that came from betrayal. The truck slowed. I heard tires crackle across the gravel, then a door creak open. I tensed, every part of me ready to drag myself back into the trees if necessary. But then I saw him. An older man, late 60s at least, with a wiry frame and a hat too large for his sun-browned head. He leaned out of the cab and squinted at me like I was some wounded animal caught in the wrong season. "Mon Dieu," he muttered. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," I croaked, my voice more rasped than words. He stepped toward me, carefully, as if unsure whether I was hallucination or danger. "What happened?" "Hiking accident." I lied quickly, just enough truth to pass. "Fell. Need a ride." "Just somewhere with a phone." He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and helped me into the truck, his hands calloused but surprisingly gentle. The seat creaked under my weight, and I bit back a groan as I shifted. "I'm Thierry," he said, starting the engine again. "Deliver produce to the villages out this way. Wasn't planning on taking this route today." "Glad you did." He glanced at me. "You sure you don't want a hospital?" "Can't," I replied. "Not yet." His brow furrowed, but he didn't press. That silence was a gift. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, steadying the whirlwind in my chest. I had to think. Move with precision. No police. No doctors. Not until I had a plan. One name surfaced in my mind like a flare in the dark. Corinne. She was the closest thing I had to family left, my late mother's goddaughter, and the kind of person who never forgot a favor or left a debt unpaid. She worked in cybersecurity, last I heard. Quiet. Brilliant. Always watching. Always calculating. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer, but I trusted her, and I needed someone I could trust. Thierry pulled into a village center, quiet, sparse, a few shops closed for lunch, and a payphone nestled in a wall like something out of another era. I climbed out, stiff and slow, and gave him a nod of thanks. He nodded back, sensing that whatever story I wasn't telling wasn't his to know. I limped to the phone, wincing as I pressed the buttons. I still remembered Corinne's private number, committed it to memory years ago during one of our late-night bourbon conversations about the danger of digital footprints. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, wary but clear. "Who is this?" "It's Marcel," I said. "I need your help." A pause. Then the tone changed instantly. "Where are you?" I gave her the name of the village. No questions, no hesitation. "Send me your location. I'll get you out tonight." I hung up and sat on a bench nearby, gripping the edge with trembling fingers. The air smelled of old stone and wood smoke. No one looked twice at me. I was just another broken man in a town full of forgotten stories. By dusk, Thierry had dropped me off at the edge of a quiet orchard. I thanked him again and told him I'd be fine. He gave me a long look, like he wanted to say more, then simply tipped his hat and drove away. Minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. The window rolled down to reveal Corinne, sharper than I remembered, her dark hair pulled into a tight knot, her face etched with equal parts concern and controlled fury. She stepped out, arms crossed. "Tell me everything." In the car. I didn't speak until we were miles away from the village, winding through mountain roads that seemed to stretch forever. "They pushed me," I said at last. "Amira. Ronan. At the top of the falls." Her jaw clenched, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. "They think you're dead." I nodded. "That's the only card I've got left. They think they won." Corinne didn't say anything for a while. Then, "Good. Let them believe that. Because now we plan." I leaned back in the seat, pain humming through me like electricity. But beneath it all, something else had begun to grow. Not fear. Not sorrow. Purpose. The cabin in Chamonix was older than either of us remembered. Tucked away in the trees like it was hiding from time, the place had belonged to Corinne's uncle, a resistance courier during World War II. I'd been there once as a teenager, just long enough to know it was off-grid, off-record, and most importantly, forgotten. We arrived after midnight, headlights off for the final mile, our breath fogging the cold air as she unlocked the heavy wooden door and ushered me inside. The moment I stepped over the threshold, my body began to give out. Whatever had kept me going this long, adrenaline, anger, raw instinct, finally started to drain. My leg buckled and I nearly collapsed, but Corinne caught me. "Sit," she ordered, guiding me toward the worn leather couch. "Don't argue." I didn't. The fire was already burning. She must have arrived earlier to prepare. She helped me out of the soaked, torn remains of my clothes, her expression professional but tight with unspoken emotion. The sight of my bruises and blood must have told her everything I hadn't said. When she stepped into the back room to grab the first aid kit, I finally exhaled. My ribs screamed, my shoulder throbbed, and the gash on my leg pulsed with every heartbeat. But I was alive. When she returned, she cleaned my wounds with the kind of efficiency that told me this wasn't the first time she'd patched someone up. You'll need stitches. This leg especially. Do what you have to, I muttered, jaw clenched. As the needle pierced my skin, I gritted my teeth. I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I needed the pain. I needed to feel it, to remind myself this was real, that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, the fall, the river. That I hadn't dreamed Amira's voice echoing above the roar of water. Finally, we'll cash your life insurance. Corinne worked in silence until she was done, then disappeared into the shadows of the cabin to grab something to drink. She returned with a glass of water for me and a tumbler of whiskey for herself. Drink, she said. You've lost blood. I took the water. She downed the whiskey in one gulp. I started digging the second I got your call, she said, settling into the armchair across from me. Didn't want to wait until you got here? Figured whatever happened, it wasn't a small betrayal. It wasn't. I know. She pulled a sleek black laptop from her bag and flipped it open. The glow lit up her face, casting her in a sharp blue halo. I accessed her company's executive comms server. I used the emergency bypass key you gave me 2 years ago. Remember that? I nodded slowly. I created it on her advice, just in case of corporate sabotage or internal theft. I never thought I'd use it. Especially not for this. I started with Ronan, she continued. He's been in contact with Galvin Holt, the head of Apex Partners. My stomach turned. Galvin Holt was a snake. A rival CEO with enough ambition and corruption to fill a skyscraper. He tried to buy me out 3 times. I turned him down every time. Corinne didn't stop. Emails. Voice memos. Encrypted messages routed through 3 dummy shells. He's been feeding Holt inside data for 6 months. I felt my hands curl into fists. And Amira? Corinne's fingers didn't pause. She opened an offshore account in Zurich 2 weeks ago. Funds started moving into it last night. After the fall. How much? 7 million euros, she said, not missing a beat. The number landed like a sledgehammer. That was blood money. My blood. She filed a death benefits inquiry with your life insurance company, Corinne added. This morning. I blinked. She didn't even wait 24 hours. No, Corinne said. Because they were sure you were dead. They planned this clean. I stood, pain flaring through my side, but I needed to move. I paced the cabin, breathing shallow and tight, every step stoking the fire in my chest. How long have they been planning this? Based on the earliest email, 8 months. But the real planning started around the time you updated your will last fall. They saw the opportunity, and they moved. I stared into the flames. They want my company, my money, my name, and now they think they have it, she said softly. I turned to her. But they don't know I'm alive. Corinne nodded. That's your edge. They believe you're gone. That's the only reason they're being so bold. I met her eyes. Then we don't correct them. Not yet. She leaned back, a faint smirk curling at the corner of her mouth. I figured you'd say that. That's why I brought you here. We go silent. We rebuild. And then we burn them to the ground, I finished. She closed the laptop and stood, tossing me a blanket. You need to rest. We've got work to do. I lay back down, not because I was weak, but because I needed to conserve strength for what came next. The flames flickered against the cabin walls, and outside, the wind howled through the mountains like a ghost calling my name. Let them think I was gone. Let them think they'd won. They'd buried a man, but they'd forgotten. I wasn't done rising. Amira walked into the apartment expecting roses. She expected wine chilling in a silver bucket, the scent of vanilla candles floating through the air, maybe even soft jazz humming in the background like the first night we moved in. She wore that pale blue dress, the one I'd once told her made the moon jealous, and strappy heels that clicked against the hardwood with an almost ceremonial rhythm. But there was no music, no flowers, no welcome. There was silence. The kind that made your skin prickle. The kind that whispers, you're not alone, even when no one is in sight. She paused in the entryway, one manicured hand resting on the marble console. The foyer mirror reflected only her, and the flickering anxiety in her eyes. She called out once, lightly, like maybe I was in the other room. Marcel. Silence answered. She walked deeper inside. That's when she noticed the changes. Subtle, at first. The hallway credenza, once cluttered with books and business cards and little mementos from our travels, had been stripped bare. The family portrait from our wedding day gone. The African mask from our honeymoon in Ghana gone. The apartment wasn't in disarray. It wasn't trashed. It had simply shifted, like someone had curated the removal of a life. Carefully, deliberately, she stepped into the living room and froze. The furniture gone. The TV, the coffee table, even the floor rug she picked out from that designer boutique in Lyon, all missing. The room was hollow, except for the dining table. One solitary piece remained, positioned like an altar. And on top of it sat a black box. Small, square, matte finish. No ribbon, no card, just presence. Amira's heels clicked across the parquet as she approached it, her breathing shallow now. Her hand trembled as she reached out and lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items. The first was my wedding suit, or rather, what remained of it. The fabric was soaked, tattered, slashed open down the back. Still damp, still smelling faintly of river water and moss. She recoiled from it instinctively, dropping it back into the box as if it burned. The second was a photo, one I'd taken just 2 months after we were married. Me, Amira, and Ronan, seated at a rooftop bar, champagne in hand. We were smiling. Ronan's arm casually draped behind her chair. I remembered that night. I remembered how I had excused myself to take a call and how I came back to see them laughing too closely. Back then, I buried that discomfort, gaslighted myself into believing it was nothing. The photo had been slashed down the middle, clean through Ronan's face, right through Amira's smile. She staggered back from the table, clutching her chest. And then she saw the third item, a USB drive, black, labeled in silver ink. Smile for the cameras. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, glancing around the apartment like she might find someone. Anyone? Watching. Her paranoia was earned. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to remember what it was like to be seen, deeply and without escape. Because she had watched me fall and not once looked afraid. She stumbled to her laptop, booted it up with frantic fingers, and slid the drive into the port. The screen blinked. A single file. Celestine.mp4. She clicked it. The footage wasn't taken from a drone or an obvious surveillance angle. It was handheld, slightly shaky, filmed from a discreet distance, just beyond the tree line, before the cliff. It captured me standing at the waterfall's edge. Peaceful, oblivious. Then it captured her voice. Clear, triumphant. Finally, we'll cash your life insurance and take over your company. The moment her hand touched my back, the look of satisfaction on Ronan's face, and my body falling, Amira screamed. The scream bounced off the apartment walls, shrill and raw. She pushed back from the laptop, her chair toppling. Her breathing turned ragged, wild. Her hands tangled in her hair like she wanted to rip out the truth. Because this wasn't grief. It was fear. Terror that someone knew. That someone had seen. And worse, someone had survived. Her phone rang. She jumped. It was Ronan. She didn't answer. Instead, she paced the room, muttering to herself, tears smudging her mascara. No, 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 he's dead. He's dead. He has to be. But doubt is a cruel thing. It doesn't whisper, it roars. A moment later, her knees gave out. She collapsed beside the dining table, clutching the edge of the black box like it could anchor her to sanity. Her chest heaved. She stared at the photo, the suit, the USB, each piece a puzzle she couldn't deny. And then she fainted. Flat against the polished floor, surrounded by echoes of a man she thought she buried. I watched all of it from a hidden camera synced to Curran's secure network. I didn't feel pity, only purpose. They took everything. Now, I was taking it back, one piece at a time. We called it Phoenix Protocol. It sounded dramatic, but then again, resurrection always was. I created it during one of the company's early expansion phases, back when we were swimming with sharks and I was naive enough to think trust came easy. Curran helped me build it, a silent contingency plan buried deep within the infrastructure of Alden Strategic, one no one could access without dual biometric authentication and a trigger word known only to the two of us. It was meant for emergencies, embezzlement, hostile takeovers. I never expected I'd be using it because my wife and my best friend had tried to kill me. But here we were. The safe house in Chamonix had become a war room. While I healed, ribs tightly wrapped, legs stitched, shoulder gingerly bound, Corinne moved like a tactician, pulling up encrypted files and routing communications through secure nodes scattered across Europe. On the surface, I was still presumed dead. Headlines were already surfacing. Tech CEO Marcel Alden missing after tragic fall. There was even a photo of Amira clinging to Ronan's arm outside our Paris apartment, Looking shattered and beautiful in a silk scarf, I now realized he had probably gifted her. But behind the scenes, we were ghosts. And ghosts, when provoked, become legends. First move, Corinne said, tapping her screen. Lock every company asset tied to your name. Activate the dormant holding trusts. Route ownership through third-party shells. It'll look like a power vacuum. No traceable fingerprints. I nodded, staring at the fire as she worked. How long will it take? 72 hours. Do it. She didn't waste time. Within hours, the board of Alden Strategic received a security alert. Marcel Alden's shares, access credentials, and capital accounts were frozen pending investigation of irregular activity. 2 emergency clauses I'd buried in our corporate charter were enacted, one of which included the automatic dismissal of any co-CEO in the event of hostile interference tied to suspicious death or disappearance. That meant Ronan was out. Just like that. No warning. No explanation. And better yet, no clue where the axe had come from. Corinne leaned back, sipping coffee like it was champagne. You know he's going to panic. Good. He'll try to call Amira. They'll think it's Holt's firm. Or the board rebelling. They'll blame each other. Even better. She smiled. I've also rerouted the surveillance footage from the falls. Sent it anonymously to 3 of Ronan's potential investors, Holt included. I raised an eyebrow. The footage of the push? She nodded. Let them stew. The angle's grainy, not enough for a courtroom, but just enough for doubt. Investors hate instability, especially from golden boys with blood on their shoes. I stood slowly, every bone in my body reminding me that healing was not linear. But I welcomed the ache now. It meant I wasn't done yet. We watched the chaos unfold from afar. Amira hadn't left the apartment in days. She was unraveling. I saw it in the footage Corinne tapped into, hidden cameras I'd once installed for home security and never deactivated. She roamed the apartment like a ghost, jumping at shadows, checking her phone 100 times a day. She hadn't returned the USB to Ronan. That told me everything I needed to know. Ronan, on the other hand, was pure fury. He showed up at the office only once, trying to bark orders, only to find himself locked out of every system. His access revoked. His name absent from all executive correspondence. The look on his face when he was escorted out by security priceless. But he didn't suspect I was alive. Not yet. That was the trick. Let them fear shadows. Let them wonder if it was guilt, or a ghost, or karma. I spent the next night going through every transaction Corinne had uncovered, trails of deceit wound like vines around everything I had built. Ronan had funneled proprietary research to Apex partners. Amira had submitted for death benefits within 12 hours of my fall. She'd already begun selling off artwork, jewelry, minor holdings. The house in Santorini was up for quiet auction. My name erased from deeds and documents like it was all just a chapter she'd finished reading. They were trying to erase me. But ashes don't disappear. They reignite. By the 3rd day, the financial accounts linked to Phoenix Protocol were fully active. I was now operating under a pseudonym, funneling select funds through a front organization Corinne had built years ago, Phoenix Crescent Holdings. I was no longer Marcel Alden, the public figure. I was someone else entirely. Unseen. Untraceable. And from this new vantage point, I began to press. I had a burner phone delivered to the Paris apartment. No note. Just the phone. It lit up 5 hours after it arrived with a single message. Confess, or I'll resurrect. Corinne looked at me across the table that night, her fingers still on the keyboard. You sure you want to play it this way? They took everything from me, I said. Let's see what they do when they think I'm coming back. She nodded once. Then we wait. We turned off the lights. Let them squirm in the dark. Amira was unraveling by the day. I watched it unfold from the shadows, my presence stitched into the fabric of her new life like a splinter under the skin, small enough to be ignored at first, but persistent enough to fester. It began with the scent. My cologne. She found it on her pillow one morning, vetiver and black pepper, the one I always wore when we traveled. The bottle had been emptied weeks ago, discarded during her spring cleaning. She froze when she caught the trace of it, her fingers trembling as she pulled the pillow to her nose. It was faint, but unmistakable. A whisper of someone she had buried. Then came the emails. Random. Cryptic. From accounts she didn't recognize. Each one a breadcrumb. A photo of the company boardroom she now avoided. A snapshot of her standing with Ronan in the elevator, time-stamped exactly 1 day after my funeral service. One image was particularly cruel. Her, asleep, alone in our bed, a shadow cast across the floor near the door. The implication was subtle, but it cut deep. She stopped sleeping after that. Paranoia sank its claws into her and did not let go. She accused the doorman of letting someone in, screamed at the housekeeper for not locking the balcony, changed the locks, changed the code, changed her number. But I was always one step ahead, because fear was the only truth she had now, and I was feeding it, one grain at a time. Ronan, meanwhile, was losing control in a different way. I knew him well enough to predict it. He hated uncertainty. Fear turned him reckless, sloppy. I watched him corner Amira outside her gym, pull her aside and hiss something just outside the reach of the audio. She snapped at him. He grabbed her arm. She yanked it back. They argued until she turned on her heel and stormed away. Later that night, she threw a glass across the apartment and collapsed on the floor, clutching her phone, whispering my name through gritted teeth. That was when the burner phone rang. She didn't answer at first, just stared at it as it lit up the countertop. Then she picked it up, hands shaking. There was no voice, only a message. Confess, or I'll resurrect. The phone vibrated again, this time with a video file. She opened it. It was Ronan, in his office, talking on the phone. The transcript auto-populated beneath the video. We push him, he dies. It's clean. No witnesses. The insurance clears in 90 days. You and I walk out billionaires. She dropped the phone like it was poison. I watched her curl up in the corner of the room, whispering to herself, hugging her knees. Her breath shallow, eyes darting like she was seeing things in every corner. That night, she didn't sleep. The next morning, she showed up at Ronan's condo unannounced, mascara smudged, her voice ragged from a night of crying. I think he's alive, she told him. Ronan laughed at first. She didn't. You don't understand, she snapped. I smell him. I see him. Things are appearing. Photos. Emails. I got a phone call, Ronan. Someone's watching us. Are you drunk? He scoffed. I'm not crazy, she screamed. Their voices echoed through the hallway. A neighbor opened their door, peeking through a crack. Ronan noticed and dragged her inside. But I had what I needed. I recorded every word. That argument became the first piece of public unraveling. I had it edited and packaged by Current's people, just enough to stir whispers without revealing the whole truth. We sent it anonymously to a journalist known for covering corporate scandals. No names, just the implication. A married CEO, a business partner, a death, and now unrest. The story began circulating within hours. Investors began pulling out. Stock wavered. Directors called emergency meetings. Publicists sent frantic emails. But no one could confirm anything. And that was the point. Amira began seeing me in her dreams. She told Ronan during another fight, this time in public, in a quiet restaurant. She said I stood by the window, dripping wet, watching her sleep. She said I whispered her name from the shower, left handprints on the fogged mirror. Ronan laughed again, called her delusional. She slapped him across the face and left the restaurant in tears. 3 days later, Ronan tried to access a private vault tied to the company's Swiss account. It was empty. I had moved every last cent. Corinne had prepared for this phase with surgical precision. Each transfer, each lockout, each traceable connection they once held to my legacy, it was gone. Their plan had always been to steal the kingdom while I rotted in the river. But I didn't rot. I watched. I waited. And now, I dismantled. Piece by piece. Amira's mind was breaking. Her conscience, if it ever existed, was tearing at the seams. The weight of guilt mixed with fear was more effective than any courtroom. Every vision she saw of me in the hallway mirror, every time she thought she heard footsteps behind her, was a win. Because she didn't need to see me to believe I was there. All she needed was doubt. And now it lived rent-free in her head. Next would come the collapse. But not yet. I wasn't done watching them break. They called it a discreet meeting, but nothing about it felt small to me. I sat in the back of a black car, windows tinted, parked outside an underground garage in Marseille. My name didn't exist today. I was operating under a coded alias, Lysander. The jacket I wore was nondescript, but everything underneath was precision. Hidden mics. A GPS tag inside my belt. Corinne had prepared it all, of course. She stood beside me in the elevator as we descended into the belly of the building where truth didn't wait for the cameras. We'd set it up through a back channel, one Corinne trusted from years spent sweeping corruption out of banks and tech firms alike. Julian Mercier, a senior anti-corruption investigator, and Judge Elodie Marceau, a woman with a reputation for being merciless to liars and ghosts alike, had agreed to meet us in private. I was supposed to be dead. And today, I needed that illusion to crack open just wide enough to make room for justice. The door at the end of the hallway opened. Julian was first to rise, tall and narrow-shouldered, with weary eyes that had seen too much. Judge Marceau remained seated, her hands folded neatly over a tablet. No robe, no performance, just presence. Lysander, Julian asked. I stepped forward. Corinne stayed behind, letting me take the weight of this moment alone. I removed the cap from my head. Julian blinked. Elodie narrowed her eyes. My name is Marcel Alden, I said evenly. And I was murdered last week. Silence held like a vice. Then Elodie finally responded, voice cool and deliberate. You're not the first ghost to walk through my door. But you're the first with a data trail this clean. Sit. And begin. We gave them everything. Every email Ronan had forwarded to Apex. Every bank transfer Amira had authorized. The life insurance policy filed within hours of my disappearance. The surveillance footage, low-res but timed to the second, showing my fall. Amira's voice, sharp and clear. Finally, we'll cash your life insurance and take over your company. And then came the centerpiece, the recordings Corinne had gathered of Amira and Ronan unraveling. The restaurant meltdown. The confession that he'd said too much. The stolen funds. The offshore accounts. By the time we were finished, Judge Marceau was sitting ramrod straight, eyes blazing. This is a coordinated attempt on your life, she said. Followed by attempted corporate fraud, conspiracy to defraud investors, and, if proven, premeditated murder. Do you have proof of survival? I rolled up my sleeve and showed them the healing stitches across my leg. Then I handed over the medical report Corinne's contacts had drafted, real scans, real blood work, all stamped under a clinic name we'd embedded in the Alps. Mercier leaned forward, voice graveled. They think you're dead? They have no reason to believe otherwise, I said. And I want to keep it that way, until the trial. Elodie looked at me long and hard. This will be high profile. You understand that? I nodded. Then let it be. I want the world to know exactly what they did. I want the world to know what betrayal looks like in a tailored suit. Julian gave a faint smile. We'll need to move quickly. If they smell even a whisper of this, they'll flee. I'm counting on it, I said. That panic is the final piece. Over the next 48 hours, everything accelerated. The magistrate's office issued sealed indictments. Warrants were drafted under lock and key. The media had no clue. Not yet. The public still believed I was a missing man, lost to tragedy. But behind the scenes, we were staging a resurrection. A quiet one. A powerful one. 3 days later, the trial was set into motion. The press hadn't been alerted. It was an emergency proceeding held under special jurisdiction due to the nature of the crimes. Only select reporters were invited. They assumed it was another white-collar fraud case. Then I walked into the courtroom. Alive. Unbroken. The buzz began instantly. First one gasp, then a dozen. Cameras flashed like lightning through a summer storm. Murmurs turned into stunned silence as Amira was escorted in, flanked by officers. Her face drained of color. She saw me. She stopped walking. For a moment, I thought she'd collapse before the trial even began. But she was forced to keep moving, every step like a betrayal against her own instincts. Ronan followed moments later, swagger gone, sweat pooling at his collar. When he saw me, his jaw clenched. I didn't blink. Not once. The prosecutor read the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted corporate theft, fraud, money laundering, abuse of fiduciary trust. The evidence played on a screen behind me like the cruelest home movie. Their laughter at the waterfall, the plan laid bare, the bank statements, the burner phone messages, their own words. The jury barely looked at me. They didn't need to. The betrayal was plain. Amira whispered to her lawyer that I must have faked the fall, that I was framing them. But the footage didn't lie. The timeline didn't lie. And neither did the blood work. When I took the stand, I didn't speak with anger. I spoke with precision. My name is Marcel Alden, I said. I built a life with people I trusted. I built a company with people I loved. And they tried to kill me for it. But I didn't die. And I'm here now, not for revenge, but for justice. Amira looked away. Ronan glared. But I didn't need their guilt. I had the truth. And this time, I was in control. The courtroom was a crucible of truth and tension. Every hour brought more cracks in their carefully constructed lies. The moment the jury foreperson stood, holding the verdict slips in their hands, the entire chamber held its breath. It wasn't a question of if the evidence was overwhelming. It was only a question of how much justice the law would allow. For the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant, Ronan Voss, guilty. A collective gasp spread through the gallery. Ronan sat completely still. His jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. The silence around him felt earned. He didn't even look toward Amira. There was no allegiance between them anymore. Only shared ruin. For the charge of corporate fraud, attempted embezzlement, and manipulation of financial accounts, we find the defendant guilty. Amira flinched. Her hands, elegant and once steady, were now visibly trembling on the defense table. Her lips parted slightly, like she might cry or scream, but no sound came. Maybe it hadn't truly hit her until now. Maybe she thought, somehow, that charm and misdirection could carry her through this. But the world had seen the truth. The final count came. Financial conspiracy tied to the falsified death benefit claim. Amira Alden, guilty. I felt no elation. No explosion of joy. Only gravity. This was justice, not vengeance. And justice is heavier than rage. It doesn't scream. It settles. It tightens your spine, steadies your breath, and anchors your feet to the ground. The judge delivered the sentences. Ronan, 20 years. No parole for the first 12. Amira, 17 years. Eligible for parole in 10. She blinked as the numbers were read aloud, her face empty of reaction. Not shock. Not defiance. Just absence. A vacuum where the woman I once loved had been. Ronan didn't speak. Not when they cuffed him. Not when he was led through the side door. He looked at me, just once, as if silently acknowledging defeat. Or maybe hatred. Or both. But Amira, she turned back as they walked her away. Her eyes met mine for a full breath, and in that glance, I saw the woman who once swore to stand beside me for life. And then I saw the one who watched me fall without blinking. That was the last time we looked at each other. The trial didn't just end in a legal victory, it became a media firestorm. Within hours, every outlet in Europe had picked up the story. CEO returns from the dead to expose murder plot by wife and business partner. Headlines sensationalized it, turned it into entertainment. But beneath the noise, a different current stirred. One I hadn't expected. Letters began arriving. At first a few, then dozens. Emails, DMs, messages from people who had survived betrayal, manipulation, abuse. Men and women, executives, single parents, students, soldiers. People who saw their own scars in mine. People who needed to be reminded that surviving doesn't make you weak, it makes you dangerous in the best way. I didn't plan on starting anything. But Corinne, as always, saw farther down the road. We need to give this weight, she said one morning. Not just a story. A space. A cause. So we created it. The Fall and Rise Foundation. Our mission was simple. Support those who've been betrayed intimately by lovers, partners, family, and friends, and help them rebuild. Legally, financially, emotionally. I donated the rest of my silent assets to seed the fund. Corinne built the digital infrastructure in a weekend. And then we sent out our first newsletter. It read, "You're not weak for trusting the wrong person. You're strong for surviving them." That line hit like lightning. It was shared across platforms, featured in mental health forums, quoted in survivor groups. People started calling us not just a foundation, but a movement. I gave interviews. Sparingly. Selectively. I wasn't interested in celebrity. I was interested in truth. I spoke not about revenge, but about recognition. About warning signs, how manipulation hides in compliments, how gaslighting erodes the sharpest minds, how betrayal doesn't always come with a weapon. Sometimes, it comes with a kiss. One particular moment stayed with me. A young man in his 20s came up to me after a panel in Berlin. Tears in his eyes. He'd been in a relationship for 4 years. Controlled. Dismissed. Silenced. When he tried to leave, his partner destroyed his reputation. Tried to ruin his career. He said he felt invisible until he heard my story. "You gave me permission," he said, "to stop apologizing for surviving." That meant more than any court verdict. The weight of what happened didn't disappear. I still had nights where I woke up, breath caught in my throat, certain I was falling again. I still saw flashes of that moment, my wife's hand, my best friend's silence, the edge of the cliff. But I also saw the firelight in Chamonix. Corinne's steady hands. The sting of the stitches. The first message I sent that made a mirror shatter. I saw my strength, and I leaned into it. I wasn't the man who fell anymore. I was the man who got back up. And now, I helped others do the same. The morning sky above Celestine Falls was just beginning to pale, threads of soft gold weaving through lavender clouds, when I parked the Defender at the same overlook where I had once stood, naive, grateful, utterly unaware of the betrayal forming behind me. It had been exactly 1 year. 365 days since the push. Since the fall. Since I died and lived again. I stepped out of the vehicle slowly, breathing in the cool mountain air, the scent of pine and wet stone brushing against my senses like an old friend. The roar of the waterfall echoed in the distance, not deafening like it had been when I was hurtling toward it, but steady, comforting even, like a pulse I'd somehow tuned myself to over time. Beside me, Corinne locked the car and fell into step, her boots crunching softly over the gravel trail. She hadn't said much during the drive, but she didn't need to. Her presence had always been a quiet lighthouse. No words, just guidance. We didn't speak as we ascended the trail. We didn't need to. Every stone and curve in the path carried its own story, and I let the silence fill me. A few hikers passed us on their way down, nodding politely, oblivious to the history embedded in the earth beneath our feet. This place had nearly become my grave, but now I walked it like it was mine. When we reached the top, the wind greeted us first, cool and sharp, tugging at my coat like it, too, remembered the moment I'd been thrown from its cliffs. I stepped closer to the edge, where safety rails had since been installed, a silent testament that my accident had sparked more than just headlines. I stood at that edge, staring down into the rushing water far below, and I saw it all again. The way Amira's voice had cut through the air like glass. The feel of Ronan's hand against my back. The sickening weightlessness, the helpless flight, the final thought before impact. So this is how it ends. But it didn't, and I had returned not to mourn, but to mark the end of what had begun here. I pulled a small wooden box from my coat pocket. Hand-carved, dark mahogany, worn at the edges. Inside were two things. The first, our wedding ring. Mine. The band I hadn't worn since the day they tried to kill me. I'd had it melted down and reforged into a thin circle, the inside engraved with fire-blackened edges, charred but not broken. The second, a note. Handwritten on the back of a page torn from the notebook I'd filled during my recovery in Chamonix. The words were raw, jagged in places from where the pen had dug too hard. Let this die so I can live. I held the ring up to the morning light. It glinted faintly, catching the first golden rays of sun like it was making peace with the day. I remembered slipping it on a year ago, full of trust, full of belief. Now, it was just metal, a relic of a man I no longer was. I turned to Corinne. She gave me a nod, silent approval, shared purpose. She understood what this moment meant. With a breath, I dropped the ring into the falls. The wind carried it from my fingers. It vanished into the foam, swallowed by the same current that once tried to erase me. Then I unfolded the note and let that fall too, fluttering down like a final breath from the past. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I exhaled. Not sharply, not dramatically, but fully. That single breath felt like the end of a war I didn't realize I'd still been fighting. My shoulders relaxed. My heartbeat steadied. I'm not broken, I said aloud, the wind stealing my words as soon as they left my mouth. Just rebuilt. Corinne stepped forward and stood beside me at the rail, her eyes scanning the horizon. So, what now? I smiled slightly. Now we live. It was as simple and as complicated as that. We turned and made our way back down the trail, the morning sun growing warmer on our backs. I didn't look behind me. I didn't need to. That place would always be part of my story, but it was no longer my shadow. Back in the car, the radio hummed with soft jazz, and Corinne tossed me a protein bar with a smirk. I liked you better when you were dead. Less dramatic. Funny, I said, tearing it open. I was going to say the same about you. We laughed. Real laughter. Not the brittle kind we'd shared in hiding, but the full-bodied sound of something new. Something earned. As the falls disappeared behind us, I looked ahead. To the foundation, which was growing faster than we imagined. To the victims we'd helped, the justice we'd delivered, the voices we'd amplified. To the life that waited beyond the ashes. I was not a ghost anymore. I was the man who had risen from the water, not for vengeance, but for victory. And for every soul still drowning in betrayal, I had just one promise left. I see you, and you will rise too.